All right, all right, all right. Welcome, people. Give a shout if you can hear me. Welcome to Movement Monday. I'm just gonna pause for a bit and just let folks give a black love, give a black power shout. If you hear me there. This is Movement Mondays within BEBA, Bridge Embassy for Black America. Welcome, welcome. We are live here in BEBA with Movement Monday. I'll be covering cooperatives this evening. So yeah, if you want to give a word that you're in the room, just speak back to me. Black love, black power, black culture, black cooperation. And if you see that ticker in the left-hand corner, lower left-hand corner, we'll be getting started here, likely at the 40-minute mark. Just want to give people an opportunity to get themselves settled into the room, and then I'll commence with the things that I've brought this evening to speak about. Essentially this evening, what I want to be covering and what we've talked about here in the group is covering cooperatives, covering cooperation, covering cooperative economics. So effectively unpacking all of those elements that deal with the cooperatives, the cooperation, cooperative economics, and really digging into what that actually means in practice and in principle. Talking about how that relates to the cooperative principles. Certainly, those principles are framed as coming out of the Rochdale principles, but effectively, we know that there is all sorts of cooperation that existed far in advance of the 18th or 19th century. So we want to talk about what cooperation looks like in nature. We want to talk about what cooperation looks like in communities, and then we want to talk about how that actually factors into how we relate to one another, how we build businesses inside of our community, how we preserve community wealth, and how we actualize these principles inside of BEBA. So when we're talking about cooperative economics and we're talking about the ability for us to engage and share time, we're talking about the ability for us to move all of these 8 forms of capital around in our community. Those are all things that I want to cover. Eventually, I won't cover all of them in this session. This session, I really, really want to focus deeply on cooperation. And so, yeah, just give a shout. Give a black love shout, give a black power shout, give a black culture shout. We are here and we are cooperating, and we will commence at the 40-minute hour. And certainly, to that ticker in the bottom left corner, I won't keep you here long. I certainly like to be very, very short and sweet and succinct with my thoughts, and then give a space for people to actually ask questions about the things that have been shared in the space. So we want to make sure that we go ahead and get to these points and then shift right along into the space where we can actually have dialogue about what this means in our own lives. And we are counting down at that 35-second mark. And I certainly would like to thank Sister Sophia for sharing out. So if you have not shared out, if you have not told your friends that this cooperation dialogue is about to happen, tell your people, let them know we are here, and let them know what we're talking about, because this relates to them as much as it relates to us here in the group. It relates to all of our community. And we are kicking in at the 40-minute hour. So I just want to make sure that I cover in the interim. Our brother L. Cade is unfortunately detained on a phone call or a conference call, so he wouldn't be able to make the Movement Monday call this evening. But I just want to cover that, we are the Bridge Embassy for Black America. We practice awareness, accountability, and action, building and protecting for Black communities. So we're inside of the group actively making sure that we are thinking about what reinvestment looks like inside of our communities. Sometimes that reinvestment looks like monetary investment. Sometimes that reinvestment looks like us investing our social capital and building relationships. But always we're thinking about what investment looks like across all of those 8 forms of capital. And so, we always want to be thinking about capital, not necessarily in financial terms, but in terms of all of the sorts of things, our human capital, our intellectual capital, our social capital, our political capital, all of those different forms of capital that actually exist inside of our communities and exist inside of space. Those are all ways that we can be interacting and engaging with each other. And what I hope from this dialogue about cooperation is that we can think more about how that social capital actually relates to the way that we start businesses inside of our community. And start thinking about a different type of business structure from the traditional entrepreneurial route. So certainly, it's fantastic when people want to take that entrepreneurial venture and they want to go out and strike out on their own. But what does it look like to actually build a cooperative business venture where there are a circle of people who are actually engaged in the process of building that business, and you have the opportunity for people to buy shares inside of that business, buy shares because they are working inside of that business. So, cooperatives can look like worker-owned cooperatives. They can look like food cooperatives. They can look like in many different ways. And those are some of the things we want to cover this evening. But before we begin, I just want to offer you all a short clip that was recorded at UIC several months ago when Kali Akuno was here from Cooperation Jackson. And I just want you all to take a listen at this scene.
And the asymmetry between the capacity you need and the capacity you have, and how do you distribute that. And so, given that we're from Valley University, although we're far from Mississippi, maybe you could, what would be the 3 things that you think, and maybe not just be capacity, but the 3 things that you could use, that you think you need, Cooperation Jackson needs now?
So let me good question. Thank you. One of the reasons why here recently I've been speaking kind of more general, abstract, the way I started. Our primary need is for y'all here in Chicago to create a strong network and a strong solidarity economy here. We need that more than anything that y'all might come down to Jackson to do, other than throw us some money, all the money you give us, we'll put it to good use, don't worry about that. But outside of that, we need other thriving examples and other folks that we can trade with, right, on new terms.
So that was a word from Kali Akuno from Cooperation Jackson. So for folks who are not familiar with Cooperation Jackson, down in Jackson, Mississippi, there's been undertaken a very dynamic, ambitious project to build a city that foregrounds cooperation, foregrounds cooperative economics, foregrounds collective construction and engagement with the community, foregrounds these principles that will, in order to actually build up the entirety of the city, it's a majority Black city. It's a city that has seen the parts of the city which have seen tremendous amounts of disinvestment. But Cooperation Jackson is undertaken to actually redevelop that city in the image of a city that foregrounds things like human rights, that foregrounds things like cooperatives, that foregrounds the preservation of wealth inside of the community and for the community, and does not foreground development that veers towards the traditional big box or veers towards, businesses that extract wealth from the community. So when we talk about this idea of cooperatives inside of a community, we're talking about a wealth preservation strategy for a community. If you have a worker-owned cooperative inside of your community, what you're doing is you're saying that the people who are actually working inside of this community determine what the profit margins are. They determine where profit goes. And so effectively, they can move profit not necessarily into the pockets of a shareholder that lives outside of the community, but they can create a business, they can create a venture that will actually move wealth back into the workers' hands and back into the workers' pockets. So effectively, it's a wealth redistribution mechanism that allows us to build businesses and to support businesses that redound to members of our community and redound to employment possibilities for the community, that redounds to meeting the unmet needs inside of a community. So before I get too far into that, because we're gonna take a circle way around to get back to this point about cooperatives. I actually have not introduced myself in depth. Some of you all may know me. I'm Michael Tekin Strode, the founder of the Cola Nut Collaborative. The Cola Nut Collaborative is a time bank, and I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. But yes, I'm Michael Tekin Strode of the Cola Nut Collaborative. Much of my work revolves around IT consultation and communications. But a lot of what I do also deals with this idea that there are ways that we could be collaborating and building communities, and that we need to explore those strategies in depth, and we need to figure out systems that help us to stay in collaboration. So one of my long-term associations for over 10 years has been with the Black Oak Center for Sustainable Renewable Living, as well as the Healthy Food Hub, housed most recently in South Shore and now in Oak Forest. And there, we were attempting to construct a food pipeline that would connect Pembroke Township to South Chicago, to West Chicago, and effectively create a system whereby the farmers that were in Pembroke Township who were looking for an outlet, a distribution point for their produce, could connect with community members who had that unmet need where several of our communities in Chicago, several Black communities in Chicago, are suffering from a lack of fresh produce. So the absence of fresh produce. So solving that problem on both ends of the pipeline, a place for Black farmers to distribute their produce and a place that actually needs produce. How do we connect those two? And then how do we own all of the parts of the pipeline along the way? So you're talking about production, aggregation, and distribution. We want to make sure that we own the entirety of the pipeline. And in that way, we are in cooperation. We are creating a system whereby we can own all of the elements of a supply chain, so that where the food is produced, there are Black hands touching it. Where the food is packaged and aggregated, there are Black hands touching it. Where the food is distributed, there are Black hands touching it, and it's going out into Black communities. So one of those types of cooperative ventures that would allow us to really feed this cycle, this circle of value that's moving all the way through, and at all points it's hitting upon Black hands, and it's serving Black communities. So the Cola Nut Collaborative is also about that. It's about trying to get people to understand that your time has value, and that the way that you spend your time can be intentional. You can unpack the skills that you have in a different way. You don't have to necessarily trade skills for money. If you trade skills for time, what are the opportunities that exist inside of that space? And so getting just a bit more deep inside of time banking, trading time as a currency. So if you have an hour of time and you spend it inside of a community project or a community process, so for instance, I talked about the Healthy Food Hub. If I take 2 hours of my time and I go and work inside of the Healthy Food Hub, I could put 2 hours inside of the time bank account, or rather the Healthy Food Hub would provide me with 2 hours in my time bank account. And then I could take that 2 hours and I could spend it on something inside of the time bank that I need. And one thing that I always cite that I always need is organizational help around the house. I've got lots of books, I've got lots of paper, and I am no great fan of organizing that stuff. But to have somebody who is available for that service, who does have that capacity, who does have that gift, trading time as a currency is a way that we can exchange value without needing money inside of the equation. And one of the things, so inside of the time bank, every hour is equal. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to build relationships inside of the time bank. So the idea is not to duplicate a system that looks just like money, but the idea is actually to create a system where, again, people can exchange value using something that's not necessarily money, and then build relationships along the way. And so a critical thing there is that everyone has value inside of the time bank. So when we think about the time bank, when we think about the monetary economy, we know that that money doesn't always go to the services that are most valuable. Certainly, we profess from our mouths that we value teachers. We profess from our mouths that we value early childhood education. But when you talk about what the lowest paid occupations are, you know that we have lots of those spaces inside of social services that are low paid, low wage occupations. And so we want to make sure that we don't go and create a system inside of time banking that reduplicates all of that inequity. We want to have a system that where everyone it has their value recognized, and the way that you do that is you equalize the hours. And what you're doing inside of that space when you're equalizing those hours, when you're giving people the opportunity to have their services valued in a different way, you're building that social capital. So we're talking about a space where inside of communities, oftentimes, we don't introduce the entirety of our skill sets when we talk to one another. So when you meet someone in a networking situation, what you might say is, I'm an IT consultant, or I'm a lawyer. But that doesn't really speak to all of what it is that you do. So I am, in fact, an IT consultant, but I also ferment pineapples, and I make a wonderful tepache, which is a pineapple soda. You know, I also I've made soap, you know, I've also, I've built birdhouses. You know, I have all these other skills that don't necessarily show up in the ways that in the things that I trade for money. You know, I trade my IT consultation for money, but there are all these other things that I don't necessarily need to trade for money, which I would actually like to engage with someone around. And time banking is a way for us to actually unpack some of those skills and then get them out into the space where they can actually be in service of the community. And so, returning to this notion of cooperation, actually, and that is a little too, I'm going to distract you for a minute. Yeah, that was actually a little too large, so I wanted to shrink that. Returning to this idea of cooperation. When you talk about time banking, you're talking about a complex form of cooperation. And cooperation is simply when humans or people or organisms, animals, all sorts of things, when organisms get together and they find something that has a mutual benefit for both of them, and so they kind of interact and engage around something that has mutual benefit. That's cooperation. It's a really, really simple process. And so when you talk about what cooperation looks like in our communities, I know that when I was a child, effectively, I was washing dishes, I was washing clothes, I was trading my services for a relationship with my family that would allow me to stay in that house. So effectively, I was inside of the household cooperating. So we learn cooperation from an early age. You know that there are certain, responsibilities that you have to do if you want to maintain an amicable relationship with your families, your parents or whomever you're in the household with. So effectively, cooperation is something we've learned from a very early age. And it's something that human beings have done for a very long time. So you go back to the earliest, human ancestors. At some point, they realized that, look, I can go out and try to hunt, this animal by myself and, obtain some food. Or I can get together with a group of other people and perhaps we can capture a little bit more food. And if we share that food, then we build ourselves a tribe. We build ourselves a sort of extended family. And with that extended family, we can get more accomplished. That's what cooperation is about. Competition might have us, competing against each other, playing in a zero-sum game. But cooperation says that you have, if I have and I share, then we can have, and then you can bring something else to the table. So effectively, we all have a little bit more that we can pass around here. So relating that idea of cooperation to cooperatives, and again, I'm just terrible at sizing these graphics tonight. So my face is all, come on, just going to shift that one about. Yeah, so what are cooperatives? Cooperatives, again, are businesses that are formed in order to serve the people that work there, or serve the people that shop there, or serve the people that are in some other way connected to that operation. So when you talk about consumer cooperatives or food cooperatives, the members who shop at that food cooperative are the ones who reap the profits, that reap the benefits. They might get discounts on the things that they're purchasing. They might have a patronage at the end of the year that they receive, which effectively means that for a portion of how much they've purchased from the cooperative, they might get a refund or a dividend. So cooperatives, in that way, and consumer cooperatives are serving members who are purchasers. Cooperatives that are worker-owned cooperatives are also serving members. They're serving members who are worker owners. So, the same people who work there are the people who actually own the operation. And one, that Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nimbard likes to cite very often is going to be Cooperative Home Care Associates. So if we think about, the home care profession, and specifically we're talking about things like elder home care, it's not necessarily a profession that's again, highly valued in the monetary marketplace. But, year over year, Cooperative Home Care Associates has been a profitable business for these worker owners. And, they've been able to raise the level of wages that they're paying these home care associates. They've been able to raise the level of benefits that they're able to reap from coming together inside of this cooperative. So effectively, they're raising the bar for that profession. But the way that they were able to do that was not by going and trying to figure out how to extract more money out of their employer who doesn't want to give it to them, but by having their own operation, where they are the workers and they are the owners. And so when there's a decision to raise the pay, it's not someone else who has to decide that. It's this body of employees that says, are we going to raise pay this year? Are we going to extend additional benefits this year? What are the decisions that we're going to make that are going to affect this cooperative? And so when we're talking about cooperatives, we're talking about operations that are meant to serve the people who are benefiting from the existence of that cooperative. Whether that's purchasers, whether that's workers, whether that's suppliers. Certainly in Illinois, because we don't have a worker cooperative law, and that's a much longer story, there are lots of agricultural cooperatives. So, effectively, farmers get together, they decide to set a specific price around their goods, and they share this back office function. So, if they need someone to kind of go out and do marketing, they come together, they can all market their produce together, and effectively, again, sharing the cost of this thing that they need by coming together as a cooperative. So in terms of thinking about the principles of cooperatives, and these are things that we've covered in the group earlier this week. The first principle of cooperatives are that they have voluntary and open membership. And, certainly when you see that, you can say, well, what does that actually mean, voluntary and open membership? It can mean what the cooperative needs it to mean. And in the example that I cited in the post to the group around this was Mandela Food Cooperatives. And so Mandela is a food cooperative in Oakland, California. And in having a conversation with Adriana Fike, who is one of the worker owners at Mandela Food Co-op, she'd mentioned that they have a voluntary and open membership policy according to the cooperative principle, but they are also in place to serve a specific community. So when they think about serving the needs of a community, and we'll get to that in the seventh principle when we talk about concern for the community, they think about serving the employment needs of the community where they are at. And so if you're talking about having voluntary and open membership, we're also saying that this community requires employment, and so we would like to hire who we would like to hire, and we choose who we hire, and we choose from a variety of criteria. So voluntary and open membership really means what you need it to mean in order to serve the mission of the cooperative. What is that mission that the cooperative is set up to serve? Second principle is going to be democratic member control. Democratic member control simply means, again, to that example from the Cooperative Home Care Associates, members get to decide, what they are paid. They get to decide what their benefits are. They get to decide what their hours are. All of the decisions that the cooperative needs to make about anything go through the membership. And so the members actually, have a vote. They have a say in what happens to that operation. And so if we talk about perhaps an example like the Dominics that used to be in South Shore in 71st and Jeffrey, if that was a cooperative-owned store, do you actually think that Dominics would have been able to say at any point, you know what, we're leaving. We don't want to serve this market anymore. There's no money in it. The reason that people come together to build cooperative businesses is because they want to have a say in what happens to the businesses in their community. They want to have a say in how the needs are met in their community. And so developing a cooperative business is one way to both meet the needs in your community and then also to make sure that once those needs are met, that you still have some control, you still have some decision-making authority over what's happening to that business. And so that can happen, again, from the consumer end, from the worker end, a number of levels. Member economic participation. So in every cooperative venture, you have some participation economically by the members. If you have a worker-owned cooperative, generally you have to have work there for a certain number of hours, and then you'll also put some money on the table that would allow you to buy a share inside of the cooperative. So member economic participation is also one of the criteria of the 7 principles of cooperatives. Autonomy and independence. So back to that point earlier about voluntary and open membership and Mandela food cooperatives, they were exercising their autonomy and independence by saying that, hey, we have voluntary and open membership, but we want to hire who we need to hire, who we need to serve to fulfill our mission. So cooperatives have the autonomy and independence to make decisions that are in the best interest of their membership. So whatever their membership is constituted, they have the autonomy and independence to make decisions that serve those members and build relationships that also serve those members. Education, training, and information. So it's really critical that everybody inside of the cooperative build their skill level. That benefits the cooperative. So when you talk about this example of the Cooperative Home Care Associates, a traditional employer may or may not have any interest in building the educational capacity of that individual worker, because if you build their educational capacity, you have to pay them additional wages. And you may not, and traditional employers may not want to do that. That's not to say that all of them don't. But when you have a cooperative, it's to the benefit of the cooperative that everybody have additional training, have additional education, have a higher skill set. Because what happens inside of cooperatives, when you need somebody to maintain or oversee the sort of financial portion of the cooperative, when you need a team of people inside of the cooperatives to manage the budget, you need people who are going to have the necessary skills to be on that committee. If you have a finance committee, if you have a marketing or a development committee, you need people who are going to have the skills to engage in that process in a meaningful way. And so it's to the benefit of the cooperative to send people out to get additional education, to get additional training, and to have open information, open access lines inside of the community of the cooperative. Cooperation among cooperatives. So this is, sometimes people will throw out the phrase, the Principle 6 cooperative. A Principle 6 cooperative is simply this, a cooperative that deliberately goes out and says that, when I need to make a purchase, I'm going to purchase from other cooperatives. When I need to, obtain some other types of services, or find suppliers. I'm always looking for people who have cooperatives that I want to patronize, because that actually builds up an ecosystem. So, one of the challenges that we have in Chicago, amongst the many challenges that we have in Chicago, is that there's no cooperative ecosystem. So we don't have necessarily a dense enough network of cooperatives so that we can change the way that other employers, if effectively, the reason that you want to have that ecosystem of cooperatives is because you want to change the way that other businesses are treating their employees. You want to make it so attractive to be inside of the cooperative sector in your community and in your city that you change the way that other employers enter your community. So if other employers see that you're providing, a higher level of benefit, if other employers see that you're paying better wages, and they recognize that they're going to lose employees, that's going to change the value proposition for all employers and all workers in the community. So that's why it's really critical, when you have cooperation among cooperatives, it helps to begin that sort of circulation process. The same circulation process that we talk about inside of the group in BIBA with our dollars is what is happening among cooperatives, and what we should be thinking about when we're doing cooperative economics. It's not necessarily just about investing for the sake of investing, or investing for the sake of showing our receipts. It's investing because we actually want to build up the ecosystem that can hold us up, so that value can move around in a different way. And then finally, the principle 7 of cooperatives, concern for community. Concern for community. So this one was actually posted this evening. The cooperatives need to be concerned about what's happening in the community where they are housed. So when I talked about it earlier, I spoke about this issue of gentrification, and we do have a situation where if developers or speculators see that a cooperative is developed in a community and it's doing well, there's a high possibility that they will come up and they will start, raising the prices of property in that community by purchasing them up and making the property market scarce. So cooperatives actually need to be aware of that. They need to be aware of the influence that they have on the community, and they need to be aware of how their decisions impact that community. And so they always need to be thinking about what are we doing, how are we impacting the community, and how do we want to mitigate that impact, or how do we want to change our decisions so that we can have a different impact. So concern for community is the 7th principle of cooperatives. And let's just see where we are at. We got 12 minutes. And I am just about wrapped. But I wanted to highlight sort of close to home, a cooperative that is developing in your own community, the Black Mall, and I'm blocking my face again. But the Black Mall. So the Black Mall is actually developing a multi-stakeholder cooperative. If you haven't been by the Black Mall, 535 East 79th Street, the Black Mall is developing a multi-stakeholder cooperative, which means that they are that suppliers, consumers, and workers all have a possibility of having an ownership stake inside of the Black Mall. Again, when we're talking about a cooperative as a wealth preservation strategy, think about the layers there. Consumers are going in, they're purchasing goods. The Black Mall is is taking that consumer dollar and then paying that out to suppliers. They're paying that out to workers. Those suppliers and workers are ideally going back into the Black Mall, putting that dollar back into the store. And when you hear Cassie and Dre talk about the vision for that, we're talking about a franchise model. So you have this single cooperative store that could potentially spawn out and become other stores, become other franchise ventures in other communities that are operating along those same sorts of principles. So again, thinking about ways that we can preserve wealth and community, not simply not preserving individual wealth by building individual businesses, but building businesses that actually have at their core these cooperative principles that will allow that value to stay in the community for a longer period of time. and we don't necessarily have to fight, around whether or not the dollar is bleeding out through Jules, or whether or not the dollar is bleeding out through Kinko's, or whether or not the dollar is bleeding out through McDonald's, right? But we can actually have cooperative ventures that are deliberate in having employees inside of the community that own a share of that business, and that will actually, support that business because they own a share of that business, because they are invested in it in a different type of way. And that's one of the things that we had initially, or that we were focused on developing inside of the Healthy Food Hub. The reason that people came back and shopped at the Healthy Food Hub was not always because we had the cheapest prices, was not always because we were on the most convenient hours, but because we were a part of that community. We were a focal point in that community for them to have to engage socially. We were a focal point in that community for them to have all of these other relationships that were beneficial, and so that made it sensible to come back and support the Healthy Food Hub. And so in that way, we want to build other businesses and communities that have all of those different tethers in them. Cooperation Jackson. We heard from Kali earlier, and and since this is my first time messing with this eCam software, I'm going to get this right in the future ventures. But Cooperation Jackson. We heard about them earlier because Cooperation Jackson, again, is down in Jackson, Mississippi, and they have an ambitious project to develop an entire city around cooperatives. And it's really critical that we study their model. So in one of the groups I'll talk about in a moment, Cooperation for Liberation, we've done some in-depth study of the text of Jackson Rising. And we've also been in discussions around how we can develop cooperatives in Black communities here. So thinking about what the needs are in communities. But what they're building out there in Jackson is the Fab Lab, which essentially is a 3D fabrication. So being able to have manufacturing that exists in Black communities that is future focused. They've done things like the Freedom Farms initiative, where they're trying to develop, again, a food system down there in Jackson that can export and have channels out to other communities and other cities. So it's a really interesting model that we need to study, because this is one of those examples of really deep and complex cooperation, of scaling up from just having one cooperative business in a community to having multiple cooperatives operating simultaneously in community, and being able to, again, move that value all the way across the chain: production, aggregation, distribution. Wherever there is a part on the supply chain, we want to be able to service the need. We want to have our people there. We want to have our community focused there and building value there. Blackonomics. So, I wanted to talk about this just because this is the gathering that I went to briefly in Minneapolis recently. And Blackonomics was a gathering of folks who are building cooperatives in Black communities in Minneapolis, folks from St. Louis who are dealing with solidarity economies, and then there were several folks from Chicago who are working to build cooperatives. Myself representing South Chicago, we had someone from Humboldt Park area, we had someone from Hyde Park, but effectively members of Black communities who are working to develop cooperative initiatives in their city, and talking about how we can build a regional network of people who are doing that in Black communities, so that we can share information, so that we can share resources, so that we can boost each other's efforts. And it was a really, really great gathering. I think really important, again, for us to focus on. One of the interesting initiatives that's happening in Minneapolis is that they have a Nexus Blackstar Cooperative Fellowship program. And that Nexus Blackstar Cooperative Fellowship is a 6-month process whereby people go through the process of learning what cooperatives are, learning how to develop cooperatives, learning how cooperatives are rooted in the Black community, in the Black experience, through texts like Jessica Gordon-Nimbar, through texts like, W.E.B. Du Bois, through texts like Jackson Rising. All of these ways that we've already been cooperating in Black communities for years. For years. We didn't necessarily call it by these same principles, but we've always been doing something like this because it was out of necessity. We needed to do this in order to survive. And so Blackonomics is where Nexus was seeking to bring a region together, bring the Midwest region together, and talk about how we can again share resources and share these processes so that we can all build our communities in different ways. One of the projects that is launched out of that Nexus Blackstar Cooperative Fellowship is the Village Financial Co-op, and the Village Financial Co-op at this point has amassed $3.4 million in pledged donations. So this is a Blackstar cooperative financial venture that has brought in $3.4 million in pledged donations. And so that means that when they launch in 2019, and so they're still fundraising, they've got a tremendous financial base that will allow them to support their communities in meaningful ways, and so get these payday lenders out of the community, actually have a financial product that serves their community that need, perhaps you need a loan that will get you to payday until such time as you can maybe get financial counseling that will get you out of that cycle. But, we right now have predatory lenders in our community, and this credit union model, this cooperative model, is a way that we can actually shift some of these predators out of our community and ensure that we're able to meet the needs of our community in much better ways. So Blackonomics, it was a great gathering. I hope to talk to you all about it further in depth, at one of these other events that we'll be having, perhaps within Bridge or within the Cola Nut Collaborative. But I do want to come forward and make sure that I open up the floor for questions. So I got one last thing that I want to talk to you about, which is, and again, there's that graphic on my face. Feel free to laugh at me as necessary. Let's put that graphic over there. Okay, Cooperation for Liberation. So Cooperation for Liberation is a group that I co-facilitate with Joan Fadayero. And Cooperation for Liberation is a study and working group where we are studying the Black tradition of cooperatives. So going into those texts like Dr. Jessica Gordon Imbard, going into those texts like Jackson Rising, going into the history of W.E.B. Du Bois, and talking about Ella Baker's efforts, during the 1930s to develop the Young Negroes Cooperative League, talking about the Black Panthers as a cooperative venture. So the Black Panthers, of course, had tremendous amounts of community organizing programs. It wasn't just the free breakfast program. We're talking about ambulance programs. We're talking about, ear acupuncture programs. So they had all sorts of initiatives that they were starting autonomously in every different chapter. So all of the different chapters were looking at their communities and saying, what are the needs in our community that are not being met by the marketplace, and how can we fulfill those needs? And the reason that they were taken apart was because, effectively, it's like when you get to effective, when you reach a level of effect of impact like that, then it's challenging to state authorities, right? It's challenging to the state to see a program that is so impactful and so effective. And so, taking it apart is really the only option at that point. And so in Bridge, when you talk about building and protecting Black, that's part of the protection. Okay? How do we protect these initiatives that are meeting the needs of our community? So in Cooperation for Liberation, we're studying the Black tradition of cooperation, the Black tradition of cooperatives, and we're trying to stimulate a process of building these businesses in our communities. So what are the needs that exist in your community? And this is the final question before I'll open the floor. What are the needs that exist in your community that are unmet by the marketplace? There's no business that's willing to service them. What is a cooperative venture? What is a cooperative endeavor that you could think to get together with several of your community members to build that would actually meet that need? And so when we talk about cooperation, that's all it is. It's community members standing together and saying, we know that the market is not going to come here and do this for us, and we can do it for ourselves. And so we all have the resources amongst each other. When we collaborate, when we join together our social capital, we can do it. We can build it. We can make it happen. We are the ones we've been waiting for. And so I'm going to go ahead and open the floor for questions. Any questions, any comments, any things that you all have on your mind that this discussion has brought forward to you. Apologies by the, random graphics, but, again, Ecamm Live, my first foray in trying to use this to actually conduct this live broadcast so that I could get the imagery in where we need it. But are there any questions on the line, on the floor, that people want to ask as we close out or near the end of this Movement Monday? And, don't worry about that ticker. That ticker will keep ticking, but, All right. Appreciate it. Great insight and information. Unfortunately, this thing, it does not actually show me names, but that's okay. We'll figure that out in the future too. All right. All right, y'all. So I really, really, really appreciate all the love. I appreciate the views. And if your friends didn't see it, this of course has been recorded to the Bieber group. It will be available there for your future viewing. And I really I want us to I want us to win. I look forward to us winning. And so I really, really look forward to working with all of you, connecting with all of you, and really, all right, we've got this, very proud of the way you have continuously championed the cause and the essential need for our community. I appreciate that also. Again, I cannot see names on this particular application that I'm using. So yeah, this is a learning process. I am cooperating with you in order to figure out, how this software is going to best serve our function. So I really thank you all for the views. And yeah, I look forward to working with you all on this process as we continue to get right, as we continue to move forward, as we continue to strive on. Thank you all for your views, and I shall see you all on the next go round.